You do not have to cut out carbs to fix your blood sugar, and you don't have to starve yourself either. In fact, the fastest way to lower your blood sugar is more about adding the right foods and not cutting out entire food groups like carbs. I've seen many of my patients who were able to turn their numbers around in just a few days just by focusing on the right foods. And the beautiful part is they did it without medications, and they were able to keep their blood sugar control for months and even years. So in this video, I want to show you how to use each of these 7 foods to reverse insulin resistance on a cellular level. And some of these foods work pretty fast, and others are more slow burners that future-proof your body for the long run. But the biggest changes don't come from any single food. They come from stacking a few of these together. And if you're new here, I'm Dr. Leonid Kim, and on this channel, my mission is to give you the science and the practical tools to not only live longer, but to feel better today. And as always, this content is educational only and not medical advice. So talk to your doctor before making any changes to your health regimen. Okay, so let's start with something that actually surprised me when I went back through the research. And the first one is not really a food, it's vinegar, and specifically the acidic acid in vinegar. When you eat carbohydrates, your digestive system breaks them down using enzymes, specifically something called alpha amylase, which is basically the enzyme responsible for turning starch into glucose. And acidic acid partially turns off that enzyme, which means it slows down how fast carbohydrates get converted into blood sugar. But that's only one part of what's happening. The deeper mechanism involves something called AMPK. That's your cellular energy sensor. Basically, it's a molecular switch that gets flipped on when your cells are running low on fuel. So when AMPK gets activated, your cells shift toward burning fat for energy instead of storing glucose. And acidic acid, which is found in most vinegars, activates that AMPK. So you got 2 things happening at the same time. First, you got slower glucose absorption in the gut from the food that you eat. And then inside the cells, you have more efficient energy use. If you look at the latest evidence, there was a meta-analysis published last year to look at 25 clinical trials, and specifically the effects of apple cider vinegar. And they found that apple cider vinegar consumption lowered A1C by 0.9%, almost a full percentage point. One caveat though, there was a lot of heterogeneity in those trials. Meaning different trials used different doses and different study durations, and there's just a lot of variability. But the overall trend of lowering blood glucose was definitely notable and statistically significant. Now in practice, I recommend my patients to start with 1 tablespoon per day, or no more than 15 milliliters, and always dilute it in a big glass of water, at least 8 to 10 ounces of water, because that's the dose that was most consistently studied in clinical trials. And the best time to consume it is right before a meal, especially a carb-heavy meal. And I always tell my patients to use a straw to protect their teeth enamel. But as always, talk to your doctor before you add this to your regimen, just to make sure that it's safe in your particular situation. Now here's a food that's probably not in your kitchen yet, and that's fenugreek seeds. A lot of people use it as spice or as an herb, but fenugreek actually has pretty powerful medicinal properties, especially when it comes to blood glucose control. There's a rare amino acid in fenugreek called 4-hydroxyisoleucine. And what it does is nudge the beta cells in your pancreas to release a little bit more insulin, but only when your blood sugar is actually high. So it sharpens your insulin response and improves your blood sugars without dropping you too low. And on top of that, fenugreek is full of gel-forming fiber called galactomannan, and that gel fiber slows down how fast sugar gets absorbed. So it lowers that post-meal glucose spike. And the most recent and largest meta-analysis on this was back in 2024, where they looked at 19 randomized control trials, and they found that fenugreek supplementation significantly lowered A1C by about 0.5%, and it also lowered fasting plasma glucose. And on top of that, fenugreek also improved cholesterol markers, and there's some evidence that it can even help with blood pressure and even testosterone levels in men. So how do you actually use this? What I tell my patients is to soak about a teaspoon of seeds overnight and then drink the water and chew the seeds in the morning. And as a precaution, we always want to start low and then work our way up slowly, because if we go too fast, your stomach will let you know about it, and you may get some gastrointestinal side effects. And by the way, both the negative and the positive effects of fenugreek can actually be pretty powerful, so I would definitely run it by your doctor before you add this to your regimen. And especially if you're already on diabetes medications, as that could cause an unsafe drop in blood glucose. Let's see, other precautions is we want to avoid it in pregnancy or if you're breastfeeding. And I always mention this, if you have a peanut or a soybean allergy, fenugreek can actually cross-react with those. So that's another scenario where I would just avoid fenugreek. Okay, the next food you probably already have in your kitchen, and it's extra virgin olive oil. Olive oil is absolutely loaded with polyphenols, especially hydroxytyrosol and oleuropein. These plant compounds, they work on insulin resistance through many different mechanisms. So one of the effects is we get lower inflammation, and then your cells start responding better to insulin. And the main fat in olive oil, oleic acid, it actually slows down your stomach from emptying too fast. So all the carbohydrates from your meal arrive gently instead of all at once, so you don't get that sharp glucose spike and you get a smaller area under the curve. And the biggest study that showed the benefits of extra virgin olive oil was the preventive trial out of Spain. So this is the trial where they took thousands of people who were at high risk for heart disease, and the group that was randomized to a Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil was 40% less likely to go on and develop type 2 diabetes. And they did that without calorie restriction or increased physical activity. Now, one caveat about this trial is this trial had 3 arms. So there was the Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil, and then there was the Mediterranean diet plus nuts, and then there was the control group, which basically just got advice on a low-fat diet. So as you can see, it's a little hard to tease out how much of that was due to the extra virgin olive oil or how much of this was due to the Mediterranean diet itself. But if you just compare the first 2 arms, so the Mediterranean plus olive oil versus Mediterranean plus mixed nuts, the olive oil group still showed a much higher reduction in diabetes progression than the nuts group. Now the key word here is extra virgin. So ideally we look for a dark bottle with a harvest date on it because we want it to be early harvest, and it's better to use it cold or to finish a dish rather than frying with it. Now this next one surprises a lot of people, and it's grass-fed beef. Yes, red meat can lower your blood sugar, but it has to be the right kind. Grass-fed beef specifically has more of a fat called CLA or conjugated linoleic acid. And these fats improve insulin sensitivity by working on the receptor in your cells called PPAR gamma, which is actually the same target of many diabetes drugs like Actos. And then beef also gives you L-carnitine, which works on your mitochondria, where it directs cells to take extra calories and burn them for fuel instead of parking them as fat. And then beef is also incredibly rich in a lot of important micronutrients like zinc and iron and vitamin B12, all the necessary cofactors for a healthy metabolism. Now, there's a lot of controversy when it comes to red meat, but if you watch any of my other videos, there's a lot of nuance there. Grass-fed beef is great as long as it's not processed, and you always pair it with a lot of fiber, and you just don't want to overdo it. And that brings up something bigger, because lean beef is a great source of protein, and getting enough protein is absolutely essential in reversing insulin resistance. But it's not just getting enough protein, which we'll talk about what that means in just a little bit. When you eat your protein matters just as much. And there's a lot of good evidence that supports getting protein early or first thing in the morning. We have studies that show that just by getting 30 grams of protein at breakfast can lower your overall hunger for the rest of the day. And there are even functional MRI studies that show that a high protein breakfast quieted the reward centers in the brain, which then translated to less snacking throughout the day. Now, in my experience, a lot of people working on their metabolic health are under eating protein without even realizing it. And a good target to aim for is roughly 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilograms of body weight, which is about 0.5 to 0.7 grams of protein per pound. But these are just ballpark numbers, especially if you're at a higher body weight. It's often more accurate to actually base your protein goals on your lean tissue mass as opposed to your total weight. So the right amount for you really isn't a one-size-fits-all. Now I want to take a step back for a second because everything I just said about protein, the amount, the timing, it really comes down to the person, your age, your weight, your medical conditions, what medications you're on. All of those things matter. And the hard part about a video like this is I can give you the science and the general principles, but I can't build a specific plan for your individual situation. And this is where getting connected to a good dietitian can really pay off huge dividends. That's why I was pretty excited when the team at Nourish reached out to partner on this video. So Nourish is a platform that makes it super easy to get connected with a registered dietitian for evidence-based counseling. Especially counseling that's personalized to you. And I've actually been referring my patients to Nourish even before they reached out to me. And I've had colleagues who also referred their patients to them as well. And the feedback has been really good, because after you learn this information, the real value isn't someone telling you eat this or don't eat that. Most people already know that. The real value is having someone build it around your life, around your busy schedule, around the foods that you enjoy, your medical conditions. So it actually sticks instead of being another diet that lasts just a few weeks. Now, the thing that usually stops people is access. Finding a great dietitian who also takes your insurance, well, that's getting more and more difficult by the day. And this is where, as a referring physician, I really appreciate what Nourish has been able to do. Nourish is covered by most insurance plans. And in fact, 94% of their patients pay $0 out of pocket. And they have what they call a Nourish guarantee, where there's no surprise billing. Your first appointment is always covered. And on top of that, they can even order labs for you and then walk you through what your numbers actually mean. So you're not just guessing, but you're working off real data. So if you'd like some personalized help putting all of this together, definitely check them out, and I'm gonna post a link in the description below. All right, next up is not a food, it's another drink, and that is green tea. And I talk about green tea quite a bit in many of my other videos, but that's because it has so many medicinal properties. And the magic with green tea is this special polyphenol called EGCG. And this compound works through several different mechanisms. So first, it helps your cells respond to insulin more effectively. It also reduces inflammation, and EGCG also activates many of the same metabolic pathways we just talked about with vinegar. Now, if you look at the data, in people with type 2 diabetes, adding green tea shows significant improvements in multiple markers of blood sugar control, like in fasting blood glucose and A1C. But it wasn't any drastic improvements. I think the average A1C reduction across studies was about 0.2%. But the main benefit here is stacking it on top of other interventions and reducing your visceral fat, which long-term plays a huge role in resolving insulin resistance. And I do want to emphasize one thing. In this video or my other videos, I'm always referring to the actual green tea drink and never green tea extracts or EGCG supplements. Because with extracts and supplements, there's real danger in liver damage because the dosing there is just too high. The European Food Safety Authority showed that we don't want to take in more than 700 milligrams of EGCG catechins per day, or less than 330 milligrams as a single bolus. Now, catechin concentrations are different depending on what type of green tea people drink, but ballpark numbers wise, 1 cup of green tea usually translates to about 50 to 150 milligrams of catechins. So for most people, I just wouldn't drink more than 2 to 3 cups per day. Oh, and one more important side note with this. Green tea can interfere with the absorption of iron. So for people dealing with low iron or iron deficiency anemia, I would recommend avoiding drinking green tea around the same time you're taking your iron pill or you're eating iron-rich foods. Now let's talk about cinnamon. And this one works by helping your cells actually pull sugar out of your bloodstream. There's a compound in cinnamon, it's called cinnamaldehyde. That's the part that gives cinnamon its smell and a lot of its medicinal power. And what it does is it targets the pathway that your cells use to listen to insulin. There's a pretty big meta-analysis from last year. They looked at 28 randomized control trials, and they found that cinnamon reduced post-meal glucose by almost 40 milligrams per deciliter, and it showed an average reduction in A1C of 0.5%. And the most common dose used in those studies was about 1 to 2 grams per day. And one thing we have to watch out for is there are actually 2 main types of cinnamon. There's cassia cinnamon and there's Ceylon cinnamon. And I always prefer Ceylon because cassia contains coumarin, which is a compound that can be pretty toxic to your liver at higher doses. And once again, these effects can be pretty powerful, and cinnamon can actually interact with a lot of medications, especially medications like blood thinners. So definitely talk to your doctor before you add this to your regimen. All right, the last food is fatty fish. We're talking about things like sardines and mackerel, salmon. Now this one is a little different from the rest. If you start incorporating fatty fish into your nutrition plan, you're not going to see dramatic results on your glucometer or your CGM right off the bat. This is more of a long game food that will pay off dividends in the future. Because remember, insulin resistance doesn't happen overnight. It develops over years. So some of the most powerful foods aren't necessarily the ones that move your glucose numbers tomorrow morning. They're the ones that improve the underlying biology, and a lot of times they may take several months. So fatty fish is loaded with omega-3s, things like EPA and DHA. And what they do is they target two things that wreck your blood sugars long term. They target visceral fat and inflammation. So fatty fish helps your body quiet that inflammation and chip away at the visceral fat, the deep belly fat that wraps around your organs. And both of these things, the inflammation and the visceral fat, are some of the biggest things keeping your cells from responding to insulin in the first place. So even though you don't see results right away, you're going after the root. And over weeks and months, as inflammation settles and you start dropping visceral fat, your cells start hearing insulin again, and then your blood sugar follows. Now, if you don't eat fish or eat more of a plant-based diet, well then chia seeds is a good alternative and a solid source of omega-3s. But they give you the plant form called ALA. But your body only converts a small percentage of that into EPA and DHA. So to still get enough, many people may need to supplement with microalgae oil supplements, which are the original biological producers of EPA and DHA in that marine food chain. And once again, you don't need all 7 of these foods and drinks all at once. The magic isn't any single one of these. It's the stacking of 2 or 3 of them in a way that actually fits your life, where you're able to stay consistent with them. And the best results come from combining the right foods with the right exercise, on top of good sleep and stress reduction. All right, I hope this was helpful. Stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one.